I used to think nothing ever really changed in a town like mine. Maplewood was the kind of place you could drive through in less than 10 minutes, where the diner waitress already knew your order before you sat down, and where the creak of the same old screen door at the grocery store felt like the soundtrack to your entire childhood. Some people hated that about small towns. I didn't. I loved it, or maybe I just told myself I did, because it was the only life I knew. It was late August, the air still clinging to its summer heat even though school had been out for months. I had just turned 19. Technically, I was supposed to be getting ready for college, packing boxes, leaving Maplewood behind for something bigger, louder, more important. But I hadn't. College brochures lay in a pile under my bed, untouched. My acceptance letter sat folded at the back of my dresser drawer. My mom had stopped asking when I planned to go. My dad hadn't asked at all. He was too busy working double shifts at the mill, pretending the world outside Maplewood didn't exist. So I stayed. I worked mornings at the diner and afternoons helping my aunt at her little bookstore on Main Street. Evenings, I'd usually sit on the front porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the sun paint everything gold before sliding down behind the pines. It was on one of those evenings that I first saw him. At first, I thought he was just passing through. Another stranger whose car had broken down on the highway. He had that look, restless, like he wasn't supposed to be here. But then I saw him again the next day. And the day after. By the end of the week, the whole town knew. Someone new had moved into the old Wexler place. The house had been empty for years, ever since Mrs. Wexler passed away. Kids used to dare each other to sneak inside, claiming it was haunted. It wasn't haunted, not really, it was just lonely. I knew that feeling too well. He was outside the house one afternoon when I walked by on my way to the bookstore. Tall, dark hair that curled a little at the ends, and this quiet concentration on his face as he painted the front porch railing. His truck was parked out front, a beat-up Ford that looked older than me. I don't know why I stopped walking. I don't usually talk to strangers. But something about him pulled me in, like he wasn't just a new face, but a disruption to the stillness of my world. "Hey," I said before I could stop myself. My voice sounded too bright, too curious. He looked up, brushing a streak of white paint across his cheek without noticing. His eyes were the first thing I really saw, hazel, but more green than brown, the kind that looked different depending on the light. "Hey," he said back, cautious, but not unfriendly. "You just move in?" He nodded, setting his paintbrush down. "Yeah, couple days ago." Silence stretched between us. Maplewood silence, the kind that wasn't really silent at all, filled with cicadas buzzing in the trees, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the squeak of a screen door somewhere down the block. Finally, he wiped his hand on his jeans and offered it to me. "I'm Eli." I hesitated, then shook his hand. His palm was rough, calloused, like someone used to work. Not like the boys I grew up with, whose hands only knew baseball bats or video game controllers. "Emma," I said, and just like that, something shifted. That night, lying in bed with the window open to let in the sticky summer air, I kept replaying our brief conversation. It wasn't much. Barely anything, really. But in Maplewood, barely anything could mean everything. I didn't know then how much Eli would change my life. I didn't know the secrets he carried with him, or the way his presence would turn all the quiet edges of my world into something louder, brighter, scarier. I only knew that for the first time in a long while, I felt awake. The next morning at the diner, I caught myself glancing at the door every time it jingled open. I wasn't expecting him, at least, I told myself I wasn't, but a small part of me hoped he'd walk in. Instead, it was the usual, Mrs. Parker with her tight bun and sharper tongue, ordering her coffee hotter than hell itself. The Dawson twins who came in barefoot even though they were too old for that, and Sheriff Colton who lingered over his eggs like the world might collapse if he finished them too quickly. Life in Maplewood didn't change. That's what made it safe. That's also what made it suffocating. Around noon, just when the lunch rush started to fade, the door opened again, and this time, it was him, Eli. He walked in like someone still figuring out where to place himself, scanning the room as if gauging whether he belonged. A few heads turned, because in a small town you don't get to be anonymous. Not ever. He slid into a booth near the window. I grabbed a menu and walked over, trying to steady the sudden quickness in my chest. Guess I should have figured you'd end up here eventually, I said, handing him the menu. His mouth tugged into the smallest smile. Is this the only place in town to eat? Pretty much. Unless you count the gas station burritos. He chuckled, a low, unpolished sound that made me want to hear it again. What's good here? He asked. Depends how brave you are, I teased, then added, the pancakes are safe. The burgers too. Don't touch the meatloaf. Got it. He scanned the menu, then closed it like the decision had already been made. Burgers fine. I scribbled down his order, pretending my hands weren't shaking just slightly. By the time I brought his food out, the diner had emptied, and I found myself hovering at his booth longer than usual, balancing the plates on my tray. So I said, setting his burger and fries in front of him. What brings someone like you to Maplewood? His eyes lifted to mine. For a second, I thought he might not answer. Needed a change, he said finally. Someplace quiet. Well, you picked the right dot on the map. He gave a half smile again, but it didn't reach his eyes. I wanted to ask more, but the bell over the counter rang, pulling me back to work. When I looked again, he was eating silently, staring out the window like the whole world was somewhere far away. Over the next week, Eli seemed to appear everywhere I went. Not in a creepy way, at least. I hoped not. He came into the bookstore on Wednesday afternoon. My aunt was in the back sorting inventory, so it was just me at the front desk. I pretended not to notice him browsing the shelves, but I was too aware of the way his hand traced the spines of books, like he wasn't just looking, but searching. Anything in particular? I asked after a while, leaning on the counter. He looked up, his hair falling a little into his eyes. Do you have anything by Steinbeck? I blinked. No one in Maplewood ever asked for Steinbeck. People came in for cookbooks, romance novels, sometimes the latest thriller. Not Steinbeck, yeah, I said, trying not to sound surprised. Back here. I led him to the classics section, dustier than the rest, tucked between local history and children's books. He pulled East of Eden off the shelf, turning it over in his hands like it was more than just a book. Like it was a reminder, you've read it. I asked. He nodded. Couple times. What's it about? He hesitated, then said, choices. The kind you can't undo. Something in his tone made me stop. It was too heavy for casual conversation, too layered for someone I barely knew. I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I could, my aunt called from the back, and he took the book to the counter. He paid in cash, bills that looked like they'd been folded and refolded too many times, then left with a quiet, thanks. I stood there long after the door shut, feeling like I'd just brushed up against something bigger than Maplewood, something I wasn't supposed to see. That night, my best friend Lila came over, flopping onto my bed with a bag of chips like she owned the place. So, she said, crunching loudly, when are you going to tell me about the new guy? I froze mid-brushstroke, my hair tangled in my comb. What new guy? She rolled her eyes. Don't play dumb. Half the town's talking about him. The one who moved into the Wexler house. The one you were chatting up outside the other day. Chatting up? I repeated, cheeks warming. I said hi. Uh-huh. And now you've seen him at the diner and the bookstore and probably in your dreams. I threw a pillow at her. Shut up. But she wasn't wrong. The next weekend, I found myself walking past the Wexler place again. The porch was freshly painted now, the shutters repaired, the weeds in the yard cut down. The house looked alive in a way it hadn't for years. Eli was there, sitting on the porch steps with a bottle of water, sweat darkening the collar of his t-shirt. You're making this place look less haunted, I called out. He looked up, squinting against the sun. That's the goal. I hesitated at the end of the walkway, then stepped closer. Need help? He studied me like he wasn't sure if I was serious. You don't mind getting your hands dirty? I grew up here. Dirt's kind of part of the deal. He smiled, then really smiled, for the first time since I'd met him. And, just like that, the house wasn't the only thing starting to feel alive again. That was how it began. With paint under my nails, sweat sticking to my skin, laughter breaking through the Maplewood quiet. I didn't know who Eli really was. I didn't know what he was running from, or what he carried inside him, but I knew this. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just watching life from the edges. I was stepping into it, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. October came like a whisper, softening the edges of Maplewood with crisp mornings and amber leaves tumbling across the streets. I loved October, maybe because it made everything look like it was caught between two worlds, summer fading, winter waiting. Eli and I spent more time at the Wexler house. We painted, scrubbed, repaired, and sometimes just sat in silence, letting the quiet of the small town settle around us. There was an easy rhythm to it, as if the house itself had been waiting for him, and somehow, for me 2.1 afternoon, I caught him staring at the old living room fireplace, his gaze distant. You thinking about the next project? I asked. He shook his head, not looking at me. No, just stuff. I tilted my head. Stuff. He finally turned to me, a small, tired smile tugging at his lips. Life. Decisions. Things you can't change. I froze. The words felt heavy, almost dangerous. There was a story there, one he wasn't telling me. I wanted to push, but I didn't. I learned that with Eli, silence often said more than words ever could. A week later, the first Maplewood Fall Festival arrived. It was small, pumpkins stacked at the town square, a pie contest at the community center, a handful of hayrides for the kids, but it was everything this town had. I went with Lila, who insisted I needed to get out of the house and see the people before they see you. Eli showed up, as I secretly hoped he would, wearing a flannel shirt that made him look like he'd always belonged here, and jeans splattered with faint paint streaks. We wandered the festival together, stopping at the pie contest to taste slices that were too sweet, laughing at kids who ran through the hay bales like they were being chased by ghosts. For a moment, I forgot the quiet weight he carried, the tension under his calm exterior. Do you ever regret moving here? I asked him as we walked past the pumpkin patch. He shrugged. I don't know. Maybe. But maybe it was the only place I could figure out who I am, or who I'm supposed to be. I glanced at him. There was a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, fleeting but real. I wanted to reach out to touch it, but I didn't. Not yet. That night, after the festival, we walked along the edge of the town park, the leaves crunching underfoot. The air was cold, but the way he moved beside me made it feel warmer than it should. You ever think about leaving? He asked suddenly, breaking a long silence. I frowned. Leaving Maplewood? He nodded. Yeah, sometimes I think I should. Go somewhere big. Fast. Different. I laughed softly. And yet here you are, fixing the old Wexler house, painting porches, and staring at pumpkins like it's all you've ever wanted. He looked down at me, and for the first time, there was an edge in his voice. Because some things chase you, Emma. You don't always get to leave. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but we walked on, the words hanging in the air like smoke. A week later, the small-town rumors reached me. Lila confronted me in the bookstore, her hands trembling over a stack of novels. Emma, you can't, she started. Can't what? I interrupted, defensive. Be with him. Don't you see? Everyone's talking. There's stuff about him. Bad stuff. I shook my head. People talk about everyone in Maplewood. Doesn't mean it's true. But you don't know him. She cried. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that I already knew parts of him that no one else did, that even if they whispered their rumors, I had seen the person beneath the surface. But instead, I just left the bookstore, letting her frustration follow me out into the October dusk. It was that same night that Eli came by the bookstore to return a book I had recommended. The light from the street lamp fell across his face, soft and warm, but there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Emma, he said, quietly, can I talk to you? Of course, I said, following him to the back alley behind the store, where the leaves swirled around our ankles. He hesitated, then finally said, there are things about me you don't know. Things I can't explain yet. But I want you to understand. I'm not easy. I looked at him, the honesty in his voice cutting through the shadows of the alley. I know, I whispered, and in that moment, we both understood that whatever was coming next, whether it was closeness, heartbreak, or something entirely unexpected, it would change everything. By the time I walked home that night, the Maplewood quiet felt different. It wasn't safe anymore, not really. Something was stirring in the air, something that carried both promise and danger, and I knew, deep down, that my heart had already started following him, whether I wanted it to or not. I started spending more afternoons at the Wexler place, even though I never said it out loud. It began with that first Saturday, when Eli handed me a paintbrush like it was the most natural thing in the world, and we fell into an easy rhythm. I wasn't supposed to stay long. I had a shift at the bookstore later, but the hours slipped by, measured not in clock hands, but in the scrape of sandpaper on wood, the smell of fresh paint, and the way our conversations filled the air like background music. He didn't talk much, not at first. He asked me simple questions. Where I grew up, right here, whether I had siblings, one brother, already moved away, what I did for fun. I stumbled over that one, because fun felt like such a foreign word lately, and I asked him things too. But his answers always felt half-formed, like shadows instead of shapes. Where'd you live before this? I asked once, brushing paint across the railing. Different places. Like where? He paused, then said, out west. For a while. I waited, but he didn't add more. I could have pushed, but something in his tone made me hold back. Instead, I just nodded, like that was enough. A few days later, I saw him at the diner again. He came in late, after most people had cleared out, sliding into the same booth near the window. You're making this a habit, I teased, setting down a glass of water. Maybe I just like the pancakes. Or maybe like bugging me while I'm working. He smirked, but there was a weariness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. I caught myself staring at it, wondering what kind of tired lived behind someone's bones like that. When I brought his plate over, he looked up suddenly. Do you ever want to leave? The question caught me off guard. Leave Maplewood? He nodded. I fiddled with the edge of my order pad. Sometimes. I mean, yeah, everyone does. But leaving and actually going are two different things. Why not go? I thought of the unopened boxes under my bed, the folded letter in my dresser. Because leaving means you have to know where you're headed. And I don't. He studied me for a moment, like he was trying to read between my words. Then he said softly, sometimes it's better not to know. I didn't ask what he meant. Maybe because I was scared of the answer. By the second week of September, Eli had almost completely transformed the Wexler house. The porch gleamed white, the shutters a deep navy, the overgrown lawn trimmed back into neatness. Every time I walked past, I felt like I was watching him breathe life back into something that had been forgotten. One evening, I stayed late to help him patch a hole in the living room wall. The house smelled of sawdust and paint, the air heavy with early autumn chill. When we finished, we sat on the porch steps, drinking sodas straight from the can. Fireflies blinked across the yard, tiny lanterns in the dark. You work too hard, I said. He glanced at me. Says the girl who spent 3 hours on her knees pulling weeds. Touché. I tipped my head back against the railing, letting the cool night air wash over me. But seriously, why put so much effort into this place? Most people would have knocked it down. His eyes followed the fireflies. Because sometimes you fix what's broken instead of throwing it away. The words lingered in the quiet, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. I looked at him then, really looked. The set of his jaw, the faint scar near his temple, the way his fingers tapped absently against the soda, like he was restless even in stillness, and I realized I wanted to know everything about him, of course. Small towns don't let you keep secrets. By the end of September, gossip about Eli had spread like wildfire. Mrs. Parker claimed he was an ex-convict, judging by the look in his eyes. Sheriff Colton muttered something about running background checks. The Dawson twins swore they saw him at the gas station buying nothing but black coffee and cigarettes, apparently proof of criminal activity. I hated it. The way people built stories out of thin air, weaving him into something dangerous just because he didn't fit their picture of Maplewood. But late one night, lying awake, I wondered, what if they weren't entirely wrong? Because sometimes, when Eli thought no one was looking, there was a weight in his expression, a shadow that didn't belong to someone who just wanted peace and quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't come here just to start over. That fall, the quiet of Maplewood wasn't so quiet anymore, and neither was I. By late October, the days had grown short, and Maplewood felt like it was wrapped in gold and shadow. The sun barely touched the horizon before disappearing, leaving streets empty except for the occasional dog walker or car with headlights cutting through the dusk. Eli and I were at the Wexler house again, sanding the edges of a window frame in the living room. The air smelled of sawdust and old wood, the way it always did when we worked together. "You've been quiet today," I said, noticing the tension in his jaw. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out the window, past the trees, past the empty streets. "I'm thinking," he finally said, "about things I can't really change." I put down my sanding block. "Like what?" He glanced at me, hesitation flickering across his face. "About mistakes. Choices. The kind you make when you're young and dumb, and how they follow you." I swallowed, unsure what to say. Most of the boys I grew up with didn't carry shadows like that. They were reckless, sure, but the kind of reckless that faded with time. Eli's kind of reckless stayed. I reached out, lightly touching his arm. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready." He looked at me, really looked, and for a second the guarded mask slipped. "I'm not used to people sticking around when they see that side of me," he admitted quietly. I squeezed his arm. "Then maybe you just haven't met the right person." For a moment, the room felt warmer, quieter, safer. And then reality crept in, as it always did in Maplewood. The next day, whispers started again. "You're seeing Eli, huh?" Lila asked when I met her at the diner, sliding into the booth across from me. Her eyes were sharp, concerned. "Yes," I said simply. "Emma, you need to be careful. There are things about him you don't know. People are talking." "I know what people say," I said, a little defensively. "And I know who he is." "Do you?" she challenged. "Because you only see the parts he wants you to see. Everyone has secrets, Emma. Some are small, some ruin everything." Her words echoed in my mind all day, settling into the spaces between the quiet hours I spent thinking about Eli. I wanted to brush them off, wanted to tell myself that Lila was just overreacting, but deep down, a part of me feared she was right. That weekend, Eli and I stayed late at the Wexler house. The sky was already dark when we finally sat on the porch steps, sharing a bottle of soda and letting our hands brush accidentally, too often to be called coincidence. "Emma," he started, voice low. "I need to tell you something. Not all at once. Not everything. But I can't keep lying to you." I nodded. "I'm listening." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Before I came here, I got into trouble. Serious trouble. Not the kind you can just apologize for. The kind that follows you." My heart pounded, but I stayed calm, gripping the bottle between my hands. "You don't have to tell me everything. But I need to know you're trying to be better." He looked at me, and I saw the weight of years pressed into the lines around his eyes. "I am. And being here with you, it makes me want to keep trying. But I can't promise it's going to be easy." I wanted to lean forward, to tell him that I didn't care about easy, that I cared about him, but words caught in my throat. Instead, I just rested my shoulder against his. Over the next few weeks, our bond grew. We worked together at the house, shared meals at the diner, and stole quiet moments walking the streets of Maplewood at night. One evening, as the first snow of late October dusted the town in white, we sat on the hood of his truck, wrapped in blankets. The stars were sharp, cold, and clear above us. "You ever think about leaving?" I asked softly. He shook his head. "Not now. Not when I found something worth staying for." My chest tightened. "And if it all falls apart?" He turned to me, eyes serious. "Then we face it together. That's all anyone can do." It was the first time I felt certain about him, about myself, about the choice to stay in Maplewood. Some things were fragile, some things were frightening, but some things were worth everything. But small towns have a way of testing what you think is safe. A week later, as we left the diner late one night, a car slowed at the intersection, headlights glaring. I recognized two familiar faces in the back seat, gossip mongers from school, the kind who thrived on rumor. "They didn't look happy, Emma," Eli murmured, gripping my hand. "It's going to get complicated." I nodded, my stomach nodding. We had chosen each other, yes. But Maplewood had its claws, and secrets like Eli's didn't stay buried forever, and as the cold wind bit through our jackets, I realized that loving him, truly, deeply, would mean stepping into a world where the past, the town. And every whisper of judgment would test us at every turn. By early November, Maplewood had changed. The first real frost had arrived, coating the streets in a brittle shimmer. Leaves crunched underfoot, the air smelled like pine and wood smoke, and the quiet of the small town had grown sharper, almost tense, like it was holding its breath. Eli and I had spent countless afternoons at the Wexler house, painting, sanding, fixing. But outside the walls of that small sanctuary, the town's whispers were relentless. "You're still seeing him?" Lila asked one afternoon at the diner, her voice low, almost urgent. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "You have to be careful, Emma. He's different. People are talking, and it's not just small gossip anymore. Some folks are suspicious." I clenched my fist under the table. "I know who he is, Lila. Not what people say." She leaned closer. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Don't let this town chew you up the way it almost chewed him up." I nodded, but the worry gnawed at me anyway. That evening, Eli and I were walking back from the bookstore when a car slowed alongside us. Two boys I recognized from school leaned out the windows, smirking. "Hey, look. It's Emma with the bad boy," one shouted. I felt my cheeks burn. Eli didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. "Ignore them," he muttered, slipping his hand into mine, but I couldn't ignore it. The whispers, the stares, they were real, and they were following us. Maplewood had a way of closing in on anyone who dared to stand out. Over the next few days, Eli grew quieter, more tense. One night, as we sat in the Wexler living room with the fire crackling, he finally spoke. "There are people from my past. They might come looking," he said, voice low. "I didn't want to drag you into it, but I can't hide it anymore." I reached for his hand. "Eli, whatever it is, we'll face it together." He shook his head. "It's not that simple. Some things don't just go away." I wanted to ask him to explain, to tell me what he meant, but I sensed it wasn't the right time. Instead, I just leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his body against mine. The first real snow fell a week later, soft and relentless. Maplewood looked like a postcard, but beneath the beauty, the tension between us grew. We had become almost inseparable, yet every whispered rumor, every suspicious glance reminded us that nothing here came easy. One evening, after a long day of work at the Wexler house, Eli and I found ourselves on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. The snow falling around us like tiny stars. "I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending everything is fine," he admitted. I tightened my grip on his hand. "You don't have to pretend with me." He turned to me, and for the first time, I saw everything: the fear, the regret, the longing. And without thinking, I leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, but it carried the weight of months of unspoken emotions. He kissed me back, careful, like he didn't want to scare me away, but also couldn't hold back anymore. When we finally pulled apart, the snow still falling around us, I whispered, "I'm not going anywhere, Eli. Whatever comes, we face it together." He rested his forehead against mine. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do," I said firmly. "And I'm here." But the past, as it always does, has a way of catching up. A few nights later, I woke to the sound of voices outside my window. Peering through the frost-covered glass, I saw a group of men talking in low, urgent tones near the Wexler house. One of them was carrying something, a bag, a box, I couldn't tell. I grabbed my phone and dialed Eli. "Emma." His voice was tight, worried. "Outside. Near the Wexler house. There are men, I know," he said, and I heard the sound of his truck starting. "Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'll handle it." I watched from the window as he moved through the snow, confronting the men. The next hour was a blur of shouting, running footsteps, and distant headlights. By the time it was over, Eli was back, breathless and pale, but holding his ground. "They won't bother us again," he said, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. I ran to him, throwing my arms around him. "You're safe. For now," he whispered. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how quickly life could change. One moment, the world felt safe, predictable. The next, the past could reach out and threaten everything. And yet, despite the fear, despite the whispers, despite the snow and the cold and the danger, my heart had never felt more alive, because with Eli, I knew one thing for certain. Some things were worth fighting for. The morning after the confrontation at the Wexler house, Maplewood felt heavier. The snow had settled into a thick blanket, but even the beauty of frost and silence couldn't mask the tension that lingered like smoke. Eli didn't speak much at breakfast. He sat across from me at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, staring into the amber liquid as if it held answers. I wanted to ask him if he was okay, wanted to tell him everything would be fine, but the words felt small and useless. Finally, he sighed, looking up. It's done. They won't bother us again. I nodded, still uncertain. But, are you okay? He shrugged, but there was a hardness in his eyes, a quiet that felt heavier than the snowfall outside. I'm fine. Just tired. That day, I couldn't focus at the bookstore. My mind kept drifting to him, to the way he'd confronted those men, the tension in his shoulders, the determination in his eyes. And then I realized something. I was scared. Not of him, not of the situation, but of losing him. Of Maplewood taking him away in ways I couldn't control. When the afternoon came, I found myself at the Wexler house, carrying a bag of groceries and a couple of blankets. He was outside, shoveling the walkway, and looked up as I approached. Thought you might need these, I said, holding out the bags. He smiled faintly. You didn't have to. I wanted to, I said simply. We worked together in silence, the rhythm of our movements comforting. At some point, I realized my hand had brushed his again, lingering longer than necessary. He didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted slightly closer, and my heart lurched. That evening, the first real snowstorm hit. The wind rattled the windows, and the world outside became a blur of white. Eli and I stayed inside, wrapped in blankets, sitting close on the couch. I don't know how to thank you, he said quietly, glancing at me. For everything. For staying. For not running. You don't need to thank me, I whispered. I'm here because I want to be. Not out of pity or because it's convenient. I'm here because I care about you. More than I've cared about anyone. His hand found mine, squeezing gently. Emma, before he could say more, the storm outside intensified, and the power flickered. We were plunged into semi-darkness, the only light coming from the fireplace. I leaned against him, feeling the warmth radiate through his jacket, through his skin. And when he turned to me, eyes searching mine, I didn't hesitate. I kissed him. It was different from before, longer, deeper, urgent, like all the tension and fear and longing had found its release. He kissed me back with equal intensity, holding me close, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The next morning, Maplewood streets were quiet under fresh snow. But the whispers hadn't stopped. Mrs. Parker at the diner made a pointed comment about bad company, and even Lila seemed more worried than usual. You too. You have to be careful, she said again, her voice trembling. People are talking and it won't stop. I nodded, understanding, but also frustrated. The world outside the Wexler house felt suffocating, but inside, with Eli, I'd never felt more alive. That week, Eli finally started opening up more about his past. Pieces came out in fragments, stories of mistakes, people he'd hurt, and moments he regretted. He didn't tell me everything, but he let me see enough to know the truth. He was complicated, damaged in ways he couldn't easily explain, but he was also trying, and I wanted to help him. I wanted to be the safe place in Maplewood that could withstand anything, even the shadows that clung to him. By the end of November, our bond was undeniable. Small-town pressures, snowstorms, whispers, even danger couldn't push us apart. If anything, they drew us closer. Maplewood could be cruel, slow, and suffocating, but it was ours, and for the first time in my life, I realized that some risks were worth taking, even if it meant facing storms, whispers, or shadows from the past. With Eli, I had found something rare. Trust, intimacy, and a love that made the quiet edges of Maplewood feel alive.